Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. In the interest of time, if more people join, that'll be great. I'll just take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Erica. I'm sure if you've been in other sessions, you may have seen me. I'm the two-year college representative for WAIE, and I'm really excited to kind of be part of this session. I know I have a personal curiosity around short-term programming, and so I want to introduce you to Allana, who will be presenting for us, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Just so you all know, we are recording this session, so just for your awareness, if you're not comfortable with that, hopefully you got a notice when you logged in, but just so you're aware that the session is being recorded. But yeah, off to you, Allana.
Great. Thank you so much, Erica, for the introduction. As Erica said, my name is Allana. I work at the Wisconsin ESL Institute, which is also called Wesley. It's in Madison, Wisconsin. And I am the activity and volunteer coordinator for Wesley. So today I'm talking about our most recent short-term program, which was a winter camp that we hosted in January of 2022. And I'm going to share my screen with all of you so you can see my slides. So let me just do that here. Okay, awesome. There we go. So first of all, thank you all so much for joining me in this presentation. The title is A Foot in Both Camps, and it's about helpful takeaways for planning and executing short-term programs, English programs during the academic year. So again, this is at the Wisconsin ESL Institute, and we have classes running throughout the entire year. We only have a couple of short breaks. So no matter when we host a short-term English program, it will be during the academic year for us. So I'm just going to show you the outline of what we're going to talk about today. So first, there will be a brief camp overview. I'm going to intro the camp to you a little bit with pre-arrival, housing, food, orientation, and classes. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into activities, chaperones, and conversation partners, because that was my focus for this camp. And then in the middle, we'll have a more discussion-based section. These are the lessons learned, the key takeaways that I've chosen to discuss with all of you. So those topics will be chaperone training, optional activities, conversation partners, and then some COVID-19 considerations based on this camp. And then at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit more about this camp and school integration piece and how hosting a camp during the academic school year can really be a huge resource for the campers. So we'll talk about the housing and food component, a little bit of orientation and classes, and then activities and chaperones and how we can use the school setting to benefit the camp. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I already kind of introduced myself, but I have been working at Wesley since 2017. I took a brief break and I lived abroad. And then when I returned to Wesley, I started as their activity and volunteer coordinator. And my focus for these short-term projects, these short-term English programs, are the activities. I primarily plan the activities. I also help with chaperone coordination and conversation partners as well. For the camp that we're talking about today, it was our most recent winter camp, our first camp since COVID. So there were some interesting COVID considerations that we had to take into account when planning. This camp was actually created specifically for an agent who approached our school. So we had the director of our school was talking with this agent. They created a proposal together, and the group of campers came entirely from this one agent. So it was a little bit different than other camps that we've offered in the past. The outline was decided on before we even had a team meeting about the camp at all. So in 2022, we welcomed 29 Peruvian high schoolers to Madison. It was a little crazy. They had a lot of energy. Our campers learned a lot of English while they were here. They were able to practice a lot of that, but they also learned life skills while they were here. So they learned how to do their laundry, how to take the bus by themselves, how to cook breakfast. I think it was beneficial in a lot of ways for these campers. They stayed with us for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the student, and had 20 hours of classes weekly. Their meals and their activities were also provided for them. Okay, so the first section that we're talking about is just a camp overview. So this is going to be just a lot of information about the camp. I think it will help us to better discuss the camp later in the middle of this presentation. So first, we're going to go over some details, the pre-arrival details and some logistics about the camp that we hosted. And then we'll talk more about activities, chaperones, and conversation partners. So for the pre-arrival, as I mentioned, we already had a lot of those bigger details decided before we had to meet about this camp at all. So the director of Wesley and the agent decided on the time, the dates that we would host this camp, the duration of the camp, the curriculum was already discussed, and some of the activities were already decided on before we started planning. So our next step was to host or to have a meeting among our admin team. So unlike other universities and schools, we actually took on this camp project as a team. So everyone on admin staff had a different responsibility in terms of planning. We divided it into housing, activities, pre-arrival, curriculum, and then of course, a lot of other things. Our pre-arrival point person gathered all the documents, made sure all our consent forms were filled out and had been collected, and then coordinated those daily logistics. We did have a housing person who found homestays in the Madison area and placed our students with those homestays. I was in charge of the activities, so I assigned chaperones to activities. I planned all of the daily activities, and our curriculum director assessed the students' level and created courses based on the students' interest. So we really were able to prepare well because all of our team members took on different responsibilities for this. I do want to share 2 brief checklists with you that we used for pre-arrival planning, and I'm just going to go over them pretty briefly. It's not the focus of this presentation, but I do think it's useful information. So the first thing we did is create a master file for our students. We stored all of their information in one place. We created an application, an acceptance letter, and a welcome packet for our students. So once they applied, and they were accepted, we were able to send out that letter and get more information to the students and their parents right away. Consent forms were a pretty important piece to this planning process. So because all of our students were in high school, they were minors, we had to have their parents sign multiple consent forms for injury, photos, free time, medical care, and travel consent was a little bit different. The students actually had to take these consent forms with them when they were traveling to the US. We created invoice sheets for each student so we could see all of their information together in one place for the students, connected with parents and set expectations with the parents. And we also created a chaperone application and distributed this to some universities in our area. The second part of this checklist, as we got a little closer to our students' date of arrival, we had a pre-orientation for the campers. This was virtual and just gave us a little bit of face-to-face interaction with the students before they arrived. They also took a placement test, so we knew exactly what level they were at before they set foot in our school. And we scheduled the airport pickups before they arrived. Another thing that we did that was new to me is we use this app called Flipgrid. If you're not familiar with Flipgrid, it's essentially an online classroom, and the teachers or whoever's in charge of that classroom posts a prompt, and those who are invited to the classroom can respond using a video. So we had a Flipgrid classroom created for our camp, and all of our students, our teachers, and our staff responded to the prompt and introduced themselves so we could get kind of put a name with a face before our students arrived. And we're definitely planning on doing this again in the future. It was just a really nice way to kind of form a group setting before our students came to Madison. And then the last two pieces are the housing requests and the dietary requests. So some students preferred to have a certain roommate. We took that into account. If they had any food restrictions or food allergies, we took that into account prior to their arrival as well. And then the last piece that I'll bring up about this pre-arrival information is we did use two forms of communication for our students, email and WhatsApp. Email was obviously very useful. It was reliable. The only issue that we ran into with email was that we started to realize that the parents were responding to the emails rather than the campers. So we weren't always sure who exactly was responding to us when we sent emails out. Because of that, we actually started to create lots of different WhatsApp groups for our students. And these worked out really well. So we had a WhatsApp group for dorm students, WhatsApp groups for homestays, parents, campers, airport pickup times, different activities. So it was a lot of groups, but actually it was very nice to be able to communicate directly with specific students. And it was a very reliable means of communication for us. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some camp logistics. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to get too detailed on these. I think it's important to understand how it worked for us, just so that we can discuss it a little bit more later. So we're going to talk about housing, food, orientation, and classes. So we had two housing options for our students, either homestays or dorms. Those who chose to live with homestays lived with local families in our area. Those who chose to live in the dorms were placed in a local apartment complex. As far as meals were concerned, we provided all of the meals for our students. Breakfast was provided at our school for the first week, and then it was self-prepared after that for the following 4 or 3 weeks. Our lunches were ordered to the school every day. This did get to be a little bit expensive. And then dinners, it depended on if the students lived with a homestay or with a dorm. So homestays ate dinner with their family. Dorm students either were provided dinner that was ordered or prepared by a teacher or a staff member. On the first day of classes, right before our classes actually, we had a full day of orientation. So we briefly introed our school to the students. We set some expectations. They learned about how our school setting works. And then we introed the city, Madison. They took a brief little walking tour and played a short game. We also had some rotating stations of icebreakers and a brief reflection time for the students at the very end. And classes, so our classes were offered 5 days a week for 4 hours each day from 8:30 in the morning to 11:30. We had 2 levels of classes for our students based on their placement scores. Our students placed really high for this winter camp, so they were very advanced classes that we were able to offer, and it was a lot of fun for our teachers to take that on. Each of the classes was hosted by or taught by a different Wesley teacher, which really gave our students some good variety in their schedule. I know some camps have one teacher for all of the classes, and that was some really good feedback that we got from our campers and parents, is that they enjoyed having different teachers for different classes. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit more details. This was my focus for our winter camp. I was focusing on the activities, the chaperones, and the conversation partners. And activities were a huge piece of this camp. We had our classes in the mornings, but from about 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. was activities every day. So it was a lot of planning that went into giving our students opportunities every day to go on trips around the Madison area. This was the original calendar that we provided our campers with for activities and classes. As you can see, classes were every weekday, and then we had activities every day of the week. Typically 2 activities a day. We really tried to keep our students occupied and interested while they were here. I will say that this calendar changed quite a bit due to weather and due to some COVID restrictions. It was a very difficult task to plan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that were faced in planning these activities in this next slide here. But first, I do want to say that we had some favorites on this calendar. Hosting a camp in winter means that there are some really unique activities that can be offered, especially for students who are from countries that don't have snow. So our students loved the outdoor activities, sledding, ice skating, skiing, the ice castles. Those were by far the favorites on our calendar. And then the lesser favorites, the least favorites on here were consistently our tours and museums. So that was kind of what we faced in the winter. Either we're outside in the snow or we're inside. Sometimes we had to be in museums, and it wasn't always the favorite setting for our students. Some of the challenges that were faced in planning all of these activities, I think the biggest challenge was COVID. Not only because it was difficult to plan in advance, but also just there were limited options. A lot of places that we would have liked to take our students were still not opened this past January. And if they were opened to the public, indoor spaces, a lot of indoor spaces were limiting their capacity. And as you can see, this is a pretty nice sized group. So we weren't often able to bring them to all of the places that we had hoped we could. Which meant that our options were limited to certain activities. And the weather also played into this. So, I mean, hosting a camp in January meant that we really had to watch the weather. It got very cold this past January. We had some days that were actually dangerously cold. So looking at our calendar, there we go. Looking at our calendar, if we were planning to go skiing on this Monday, but it was freezing temperatures, we had to be able to switch these pieces around pretty last minute. So planning was definitely a challenge here. And not only did we have to consider the outdoor activities, but also the indoor activities. We tried to transport our students on public transportation as often as possible, but sometimes those bus time, the waiting for the bus could take a little bit longer. And so if the buses didn't come frequently for bowling, for example, we couldn't do that on a cold day either. So these were some huge challenges that I personally faced in planning. And I think moving forward, hopefully the COVID component is less of an issue, but hosting a camp in the winter time during an academic school year, it can be hard with the weather. It's really hard to predict that piece. Although there were a lot of challenges in planning, we did come across some things that really worked for these activities. So these are 4 things that us as an admin team thought worked out very well with planning and executing these activities for our students. We had regular Wesley students volunteer as chaperones for this camp, and it worked out really great. Not only did our Wesley students love the opportunity to go on events like this, and it gave them a little bit more responsibility, but our campers enjoyed having the Wesley students there. It was closer age, the age gap was a little bit smaller between our regular Wesley students and our campers than our campers and our older chaperones. So they really liked having them around. We also appointed some student leaders within the camp group. So every day we tried to have a leader for that day, help the chaperones with small tasks like taking attendance, making sure everyone has their bus pass, just little things like that. And we also combined a lot of our activities. So this was a huge benefit, I would say, of hosting this camp during the school year, is that we were able to offer our activities to the campers and to our regular students. And it just, everyone loved it. We were able to do a lot of bigger trips, like skiing, for example. And our campers were exposed to students from all over the world. I think it was really enriching to their experience. And then the last thing that really worked well was offering optional activities. And at first we were hesitant to do this, but just given the weather being cold and some of our activities being limited, we did have more museums than we had anticipated, probably like 4 total. It wasn't a lot of museums, but the students that didn't like museums tended to misbehave on these trips. And so towards the end of our camp, we offered some of the museums and tours as optional activities. And this worked out really well for us. Most of the students still attended. The students that didn't attend were the ones that were causing problems in these settings. And so it really helped out a lot. Okay. So chaperones. Oh, sorry, I see someone offered or has a question in the chat, what the fees were for the students. So we had one fee up front. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I was more on the planning side for activities and the chaperones and things like that. I don't know exactly the fee. Yeah, I can't give you a solid answer on that. I'm really sorry. If you wanted me to, I could look it up at the very end of this presentation. I do have a document I can look into and get that answer for you. So thank you for that question. All right, so chaperones. We had a pretty simple chaperone schedule for the camp. We had one resident assistant who lived with our students. He went on most of the trips with our students. We had a rotating schedule of daily chaperones. I was the backup, and then we had lots of volunteers helping out, not just Wesley students, but also conversation partners from UW-Madison who were already working with our Wesley students were kind enough to volunteer their time as well. Okay, and then the last piece that I have to discuss with this camp overview is conversation partners. This was a pretty big component to our camp, and it worked out very well for us. It was actually a highlight of our campers' experience. So the conversation partner program, our school, Wesley, partnered with a local high school, and we were able to meet with them once a week. So the goal was to visit this school and to speak in English, to exchange language if possible with the students at the school. The school that we chose to partner with was Madison Country Day School. They have a private IB curriculum, and all of our students actually went to IB schools in Peru. So they were very familiar with this setting, and they really liked learning more about how high school looks in Wisconsin. And it was a good opportunity for them to discuss that. Our conversation partners, they primarily exchanged languages. So they did 5-minute Spanish conversations, 5-minute English conversations. There were board games and sports involved. And our campers really, truly loved meeting with their conversation partners. I think that moving forward, this is something we anticipate always offering for campers, is having that component of local students their age to be able to interact with. It really added a lot to their experience here in Wisconsin. Okay, before I move on to this discussion for lessons learned, are there any questions about the camp overview that anyone has? If not, it's okay. I just thought I'd take a moment to ask. No? That's okay.
I
All
had a
right.
question
Yeah,
about
sure.
using your current students as chaperones. How
Yes.
did that go, or were you concerned about any issues with that? And like, were there like limitations as to like or parameters that you set for those students?
Mhm. So whenever, that's a great question. Whenever we had our regular students volunteer as chaperones, they were actually just assisting our lead chaperones. So we never put those students in charge of the group. It was more like adding additional support to our existing chaperone schedule. And it wasn't something we went into the camp planning to do. It was something that just kind of naturally happened as, you know, our regular Wesley students were watching our campers go on all of these fun activities and really just wanted to be involved. So we spoke with some of our more natural leaders of our Wesley group and kind of put them on different activities. We got some feedback from the chaperones that were there, just making sure that it was useful to have our Wesley students as chaperones. And um, what we found was actually our campers listened better to our Wesley students than to our actual chaperones. It was really interesting. Um, for some of it, I think it was because we had some Spanish speaking Wesley students who assisted as chaperones. And because all of our students in this camp were from Peru, they all spoke Spanish. So if they weren't listening in English, just having that additional support of someone who speaks Spanish to kind of keep them in line, it worked out really well. So yeah, thank you, Erica.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So we're gonna move into a more discussion-based section of this presentation. So in this section, these are those key takeaways that I'd like to discuss from the camp. I've chosen 4 different topics to discuss in these lessons learned: COVID-19, chaperones, activities, and then conversation partners. So the way that I'm going to lay this out is a problem and solution model. So for each of the topics, I will present you with a situation that arose during the winter camp, the ideal solution, something that we would, how we would solve this in a perfect world, and then a more realistic solution, maybe some way to reframe the problem or the issue that solves it from a different angle. So for example, a situation that came up with our camp was that we had a lot of different arrival times because the parents booked the flights for their students or for their children. And ideally, what we'd like to do is just require that all of the flights are booked at the same time. So same time, same day, with the travel agent, with travel insurance. But realistically, we know that this just isn't possible for a lot of the families. They're looking to find the cheapest flights that work with their schedule. So instead, a realistic solution is to encourage the same arrival day, but also on our end, just to make sure we have the staffing to support airport pickups. So rather than limiting the flights that students can take, just making sure that we have a system in place to be able to pick up all of our students. Okay. So the first 2 key takeaways are going to be COVID and chaperones. So COVID-19, the situation that we ran into, we really didn't expect this, but our students were not necessarily at the maturity level that we had expected them to be at. A lot of our students were at an appropriate maturity level, but for some of our students, we could really tell that they had missed some of those formative social, like, growing years in school. They hadn't been around their friends in person in so long, and they were so excited to be around their friends that the maturity levels sometimes were lower than what we had hoped for. Ideally, what we'd want to do is just inform the students of our expectations and implement consequences for misbehavior. Can anyone think of a more realistic solution for this issue? I'll share with you what I think is realistic for this first one. I do think that the ideal solution is actually pretty realistic. So we can still set guidelines for these students, but also adjusting the teacher's expectations of the students, just knowing that because we're still coming out of COVID, and these high schoolers for these short-term programs, they've missed some really important formative years of growth. We have to recognize that as a whole, and that's something that we as a Wesley team realized it's just probably a part of hosting camps moving forward, is knowing that the students might not necessarily be coming at a maturity level that we would expect. Okay, the second lesson has to do with chaperones. So a situation that we that came up was that our students misbehaved on some of the activities, and our chaperones didn't always take action when this happened. Ideally, we'd love if we just trained our chaperones for what to expect and how to take action in this behavior. Does anyone have any ideas for a realistic solution to this problem? I think that the solution to this realistically is quite similar to the COVID-19 solution. So not only training our chaperones so that they know what to expect and how to take action, but also just making sure that the chaperones feel really comfortable and supported. So having those extra volunteers present, making sure that the message is being communicated clearly to students. I think that that is a realistic way to solve this issue as well. Okay, so just two more here, activities and conversation partners. So for activities, a situation that we ran into is that not all of our students preferred or enjoyed all of the activities. So we had some feedback that they loved certain things, they really didn't like certain things. Ideally, we would want to schedule activities that everyone is interested in, everyone loves, but that's not realistic. So does anyone have any ideas on how we might solve this realistically?
I think maybe having like a good combination of both, but also think maybe having some sort of, again, like setting expectations right with students on the value. So like, while they may not appreciate going to a museum or like doing something like that, like if you can kind of talk about the cultural context around that and create value and recognize that everything has to be like super fun but can still be really rewarding. Not that that's gonna matter, but like at least there's context around it.
Right, definitely true. I think actually I didn't mention this when we were talking about classes, but we did have a class for all of our students where we introed the activities and explained their value. So we had an activity-based class where we would kind of talk about the art museum before we went to the art museum, so they knew what to look for. And that did help with a lot of our students. And I think just having that, like explaining that to them, I agree with you, Erica. I think that does help a lot. And knowing that not everything's meant to be fun, some of it's meant to be enjoyed in different ways.
Yeah, and there's some really great comments in the chat too about like building in like contests or adding in like elements that engage the students. And then another person has suggested polling students ahead of time so that you can build in those things that maybe that particular group is interested in. And then another one, allowing students to suggest activities as part of the recruitment or sign up process, and then connecting those activities to program goals. So,
yeah, I like, so the contest, I really like that comment. we tried to do that, and I think we would like to incorporate that more in the future. We did a scavenger hunt contest in our first week of activities, and our students really enjoyed that. So doing something similar, maybe in museums, could be beneficial to the students trying to find information at the museums if we were able to visit ahead of time and make some sort of like scavenger hunt or like a worksheet that kind of goes along with that activity. I think that's a great idea. Polling the students is something we're actually going to do for our future camps. I think the difficulty with this winter camp was that because of COVID, there really were limited options. And so polling them, we put everything we could into the activity calendar. And some of it still had to be indoors because of the weather and because of COVID. But moving into a season that hopefully isn't as affected by COVID, having a poll ahead of time is definitely a great idea. And then also allowing students to suggest activities as part of the recruitment and sign up. We weren't able to do this with our winter camp prior to the camp starting, but as we kind of went through those weeks and learned as we were going through the camp, we did allow some of the days to be chosen by our students. So we would ask them, hey, do you want to go mini golfing or do you want to go bowling today or tomorrow? And we could plan those activities a little bit less like prior to the event. So for me, I think a huge lesson in activity planning was kind of, you know, not controlling everything and not trying to have everything planned ahead of time, but having that flexibility of getting feedback throughout the process and like modifying that schedule as we were going. So thank you all so much for those ideas. I think they're great comments. I will share the realistic solutions that I had here. Was offering multiple or optional activities or multiple activity options for certain days. So this is something we're going to be doing in the future, is having an educational track and a cultural track to our activities. Maybe just like once or twice a week, offering either a tour of a campus or going bowling, something like that, where our students can pick between the two activities based on their interest. We had some students who really, really wanted to go to universities, and we had some students who really, really didn't. So being able to offer both and let them choose kind of alleviates that issue. And then also scheduling in free time. We really tried to pack these schedules full, and we realized that these students wanted freedom. And so being able to give them free time, as long as we knew where they were going, when they would be back, monitoring their free time, but giving them that feeling of freedom really did help with our activity planning as well. Awesome. Okay, so the last key takeaway that I wanted to bring up was the Conversation Partner program. Overall, Conversation Partners was very successful. I think it worked out great having local high school students partner with our camp. The only problem that we ran into is that our conversation partners were not able to attend any of our activities. We invited them to all of our activities. They weren't able to attend any of them. And that was an issue. We really didn't want that to be the case. So ideally, we'd like to schedule activities that align with the regular high school schedule. But the problem was that our free time was in the afternoon when they were in classes. So does anyone have maybe a realistic solution to how we might plan activities with local students? Yeah, so I see someone in the chat, see what activities are planned and asked to join. Yep, that's pretty much what I was thinking as well. Kind of instead of offering activities to the school, trying to work with them and see what already is in the works for the school, and if we can partner on activities rather than just inviting them to what we have planned. That really ensures that the students at the high school will be able to attend. We'd have support from their teachers and their admin staff, and it would probably be a better way to partner with the school. The other idea that I wanted to mention, so working with the high school teachers to plan events, and as someone mentioned here, seeing what's already planned at the school is a great realistic solution. And then also having multiple partner schools. So we partnered with one school, and I think moving forward, having multiple schools that we partner with is probably better. It just gives us a wider range of availability. Maybe we wouldn't have to rely all on one group to be available on a certain day. We would have, you know, more students that could come to our activities. Okay, so this last bit, we're going to discuss a little bit of the camp and school integration. So in this section, I'm going to highlight some of the ways to utilize resources that are available during the academic year to benefit the camp experience. So this is really the primary benefit of offering a camp during the academic year, is that we have a schedule that already exists. We have resources that already exist. We have classes in session. There's students that are available to help. There's teachers who are already there. And so this is mutually beneficial. Not only do our campers get a better experience, but the regular students are able to have more opportunities. They have more activities available to them, more opportunities to speak English and to gain some responsibility as well. So I have 8 ways to integrate the academic setting and the camp setting. We're going to go through them kind of quickly. I'm not going to get super detailed with any of these, but I just wanted to give some ideas of what we have learned through our camp experience this past winter. So the first 3 are food, housing, and orientation. So for food, we're thinking in the future, having some of our Wesley students assist as cooks for dinner meals. So some of our students love cooking, and they might want to share how to make something from Thailand or how to make something from Burkina Faso. And so being able to offer this to our camp students really enriches their experience and exposes them to more countries and cultures than those who are immediately surrounding them in the camp. For housing, we would like to include our Wesley students as assistants to the RA. So just monitoring noise, maybe checking in to make sure students know how to do their laundry, like small tasks, just kind of giving support to the RAs. For the orientation, we were able to integrate our school setting and our camp setting pretty well. We had our teachers lead the icebreakers so that the campers knew what faces to, could put faces with names and become familiar with teachers. We also had Wesley students lead the tours of Madison and explain the school expectations. And I think that our campers were more engaged when the individuals sharing the information were younger. And so they really liked that aspect to the orientation. In the future, we'd like to integrate our Wesley students even more with our orientation. Then for chaperones, we did include Wesley students as volunteer chaperones. Teachers volunteered to cook dinners, and we had conversation partners volunteer as well. We'd like to have Wesley buddy system in the future. So having our regular students partner up with our campers so that they have kind of someone to ask questions to, like, where's a good place to eat? Or, hey, can you help me take the bus today? I don't know how to do that. So we think that would be super useful in the future. And for classes, there's a few ways we'd like to integrate our academic Wesley setting with our camp setting. We'd really like to have Wesley students sit in on a few classes, especially in the very beginning, as student teachers and just set good models of behavior in the classroom. We also have a teacher training program at Wesley, and using those teacher trainees as classroom assistants would be very useful as well. And something we're thinking about for the future is actually integrating our motivated campers into some regular Wesley classes So for example, if a camper is interested in business, we can let them sit in on a few of our business classes with our adult students and just kind of gain a little bit more from their camp experience based on their interests and motivation. And then the last two here, for activities, as I have talked about quite a lot today, just organizing activities between the campers and the regular students was a great way to introduce those two groups and really to help them build off of each other. We also had a final project showcase for our campers that we invited all of our Wesley students to as an audience, and they really enjoyed being able to take part in that. And then the last thing I'll say here is that there were a lot of life skills that were learned from during this camp. And so possibly having our listening and speaking classes at Wesley take videos of how to do laundry, how to take the bus, how to cook a simple meal, or how to clean their kitchen, and upload these videos as an assignment to a Google Classroom or the WhatsApp group for the campers. I think that would really set our campers up for success prior to arriving. I see there's one. Yeah, okay. This is my last slide here. I just was gonna say, yeah, overall, we learned a lot from this camp. I think the biggest takeaway that we had was just really pushing how we can integrate our regular Wesley, regular academic resources and use those to benefit our camp. So using teachers and students and admin as a part of the camp program. So that's everything I have for all of you. Thank you so much for joining me today.